Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into a fascinating bit of scripture, Mark chapter 6. Our source for this, as usual, is some really insightful analysis, this time from MCS, Mark chapter 6. And our mission, well, it's to pull out those key nuggets, about relationships, faith, authority, the real challenges of ministry. We're hoping to find some surprising insights and lessons you can actually use.
Absolutely. And Mark 6 is, well, it's a real turning point. It follows right after Jesus shows some incredible authority back in chapter 5 all around Galilee. Now we see him going back home, basically, to familiar territory. And things don't quite go as you might expect. And then his ministry just explodes outwards through the disciples. It really sets the scene.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that first scene. Jesus in Nazareth. It might feel, well, maybe a bit uncomfortably familiar for some of us listening. He goes back to his hometown, right, where he grew up. Everyone knows him, or thinks they do. So he's in the synagogue on Shabbat teaching, and the people are, initially blown away. His wisdom, the miracles they've heard about. But then it flips really fast. They go from amazement to dismissal. You hear them murmuring, right, where'd this guy get all this? What's this wisdom? These miracles. Isn't he just the carpenter, Mary's son. We know his brothers, James, Joseph, Judas, Simon. His sisters are right here. And the source says they took offense at him. It's that he's just one of us kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And that leads straight to Jesus' really profound statement, the one about a prophet not being respected in his own hometown, among his own relatives, even in his own house. And this hits home, doesn't it? It's not just about abstract belief. It's about active trust. Think about it in your own life. Maybe old friends, family, they remember the old you. They might struggle to accept the person you've become, especially if you've, grown in faith or changed a lot. They hold on to that past version. It happens.
Yeah, that rings true. And the consequence of their unbelief is, well, it's startling. The text says, so he could do no miracles there other than lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. Then it adds, he was amazed at their lack of trust. Could do no miracles. That phrase just stops you in your tracks. How could he not be able to?
Right, it's crucial. It wasn't a lack of power in Jesus. It was their inability, their refusal, really, to accept him for who he was, the Son of God. Their prejudice, that familiarity, it basically put up a wall. It limited what could happen on a larger scale. It's a sobering thought about how our own receptiveness, our willingness to believe, affects things.
So what does Jesus do? He doesn't stick around arguing, trying to force it. Nope. He went through the surrounding towns and villages teaching. He just moved on, found different ground.
And that's such a powerful lesson for us, right? If your efforts aren't working somewhere, if the message isn't landing, there comes a time when you need to shift your focus, move to more, fertile soil. The source puts it nicely. The plant is judged by the crop it produces, not by the amount of its growth. It's not about giving up easily, but about recognizing where your energy is best spent for the kingdom. Find the open hearts.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, I think. He doesn't just move on alone. He takes this big step. He summoned the 12 and started sending them out in pairs. And listen to this. Giving them authority over the unclean spirits. This is delegation on a whole new level.
Yeah, and sending them in groups of 2 is deliberate. It's not just for company. Think about it biblically. 2 is the number for a legal witness, right? For testimony to be considered valid. So their mission wasn't just preaching, it was about validating the message. 2 voices carry more weight, more authority.
And the instructions he gives them are super specific, almost stark. Take nothing for your trip except a walking stick. No bread, no pack, no money in your belt. Wear shoes, but not an extra shirt. Sounds tough for a mission trip. Yeah. And then, if people don't welcome them, shake the dust off your feet as a warning to them.
Right. And those instructions, they weren't really about hardship for hardship's sake. It was about focus. Total focus on the mission. Travel light. Rely on God. They weren't supposed to get bogged down accumulating stuff. And that shaking the dust, it wasn't a curse. It was more like a prophetic symbol. A visual way of saying, okay, we delivered the message. Your response is on you now. It puts the responsibility squarely on the hearer.
So did it work? What happened? The source says. So they set out and preached that people should turn from sin to God. They expelled many demons and they anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. Wow. Power and results.
Mm-hmm. And this really highlights something the source calls a modern divorce between preaching and God's power. Mm-hmm. See it sometimes, right? Some people preach maybe very eloquently, but there's no spiritual punch, no real transformation happening. Then others get caught up in chasing signs and wonders, but the core gospel message gets lost. But the source stresses the preaching and the signs are designed by God to work together. Just like with the apostles, they validate each other. That disconnect we sometimes see today, it kind of misses the biblical model.
Okay, so the word is spreading. Jesus' reputation is growing, and it even reaches King Herod. And people are buzzing, speculating, who is this guy? Some thought John the Baptist was back from the dead. Others figured maybe Elijah or another prophet. Kind of like ancient water cooler talk.
Yeah, but what's really striking is Herod's personal take on it. He wasn't just speculating, he was convinced. He believed Jesus was John the Baptist, the man he had beheaded, somehow raised from the dead. That's coming from a place of guilt, isn't it? A haunted conscience.
Which leads us right into that grim backstory. Why was John imprisoned in the first place? Because Herod had married Herodias, who was actually his brother Philip's wife, a clear violation of the Torah, and John called him out on it directly. Took some guts.
Incredible courage. John was a true herald. He spoke truth to power. Didn't matter if it was the king or common folk. And that's a challenge for us, isn't it? Do we faithfully share the gospel, even when it's uncomfortable, even to people who maybe want to hear it, not just in church, but out there? John's example is pretty stark.
So Herodias, well, she obviously hated John for that, wanted him gone. But Herod's relationship with John was complicated. The source says he stood in awe of Buchanan John and even protected him, knew he was a righteous, holy man. And apparently, whenever Herod heard John preach, he got deeply disturbed yet. He liked to listen to him. He was torn, fascinated, but convicted.
It's fascinating, isn't it? He's drawn to the truth, impacted by it. But then comes that birthday banquet, the tragic climax. Herodias' daughter dances. Herod makes a rash public vow, probably fueled by pride and maybe too much wine. Ask me for anything, up to half my kingdom. What a reckless promise.
And Herodias sees her chance, tells her daughter what to ask for. The request is just chilling. I want you to give me right now, on a platter, the head of Yochanan the Immerser, John the Baptist's head. The text says Herod was appalled. He knew it was wrong, but he'd made an oath in front of everyone. Pride won. He gave the order. John was beheaded. Just like that.
And that story connects right to us, the listener. Herod heard the truth. He felt its weight, but he didn't act on it. He kept Herodias, kept the sin. His choices spiraled. That illegal marriage led to silencing the prophet, which led to that vow, which led to murder. It shows how compromise, unrepented sin, it rarely stays small, does it? It often leads down a path, one step after another, further from the truth.
Okay, moving on from that darkness. The apostles come back from their mission trip. They're buzzing, excited, reporting everything they had done and taught. And Jesus sees they're exhausted. His response is pure compassion. Come with me by yourselves to a place where we can be alone and you can get some rest. He gets their human need for rest.
So important. That need for rest, for time alone with God. It makes you wonder, for you listening, are you excited about what God's doing in you and through you? If maybe that excitement's faded, perhaps it's a sign you need that pause. Step back, reconnect, make sure you're actually doing what he has planned, not just running on fumes.
But their quiet getaway doesn't happen. A huge crowd spots them, runs ahead, and meets them where they're landing. Plane's interrupted. And Jesus' reaction, not annoyance, instant compassion. He saw them like sheep without a shepherd. So what does he do? He began teaching them many things, puts their needs first.
That's a real challenge, isn't it? Would you do that? Tired, looking forward to rest, and then putting others' needs first. The source rightly points out that kind of compassion, especially when you're weary, that's really possible only by and through Jesus. It's supernatural.
So time passes, it gets late, the disciples get practical, send the people away, they tell Jesus, so they can go find food. Now, we often read that as just lack of faith, but the source suggests maybe they were trying to imitate Jesus's compassion just in a, well, earthly, practical way. Still focused on the logistics, maybe a bit confused about how Jesus operates. They're learning.
And then Jesus drops that bombshell command. Give them something to eat yourselves. You can almost see their faces. Us. With what? Then it gets practical too, but differently. How many loaves do you have? Go and check. They come back with the count. 5. And 2 fish. Uh-oh. Not exactly catering for thousands.
And then the miracle just unfolds. Jesus takes the bread and fish, looks up to heaven, says the blessing, the bracha. Then he breaks the loaves, starts giving them to the disciples to hand out. Simple actions. It's so simple. An act of faith. He didn't plead or panic. Just thank the Father. Trust it. Imagine being a disciple there, handing out bread, and it just keeps coming, more and more. It's such a picture of God's provision, isn't it? Bring him what little you have. Trust him. And he can multiply it beyond belief. His promises hold true.
And the sheer abundance afterwards. They collect 12 baskets full of the broken pieces and fish after feeding 5,000 men, plus women and children probably. It's incredible.
Right. And that number 12 again, 12 baskets left over. It often points to divine authority, God's perfect government. It wasn't just enough, it was overflowing, superabundance, showing God's limitless power.
So immediately after this massive event, Jesus does something interesting. He sends the disciples off in the boat across the lake, tells them to go ahead, while he goes up into the hills alone to pray. Needs that time, that reconnection after such a huge expenditure of energy and power. Exactly. But then, later that night, he sees them out on the lake, having difficulty rowing because the wind was against them. They're struggling. So he comes to them walking on the lake. But here's a fascinating detail the source highlights. The original language suggests he meant to come alongside them, or maybe even pass them by. What does that imply? Maybe that Jesus won't just barge in uninvited. If we're determined to struggle in our own strength, he might just let us. He respects our will, waiting for us to call out.
And their reaction when they see him walking on water, pure terror. They thought it was a ghost and let out a shriek. In their fear and exhaustion, they didn't even recognize him.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? In our own storms, when we're tired, afraid, not really looking for God, we can miss him, misinterpret his presence. But Jesus speaks calm into their fear. Courage, it is I. Stop being afraid. And the wind died down, but here's the kicker. They were completely astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves. On the contrary, their hearts had been made stone-like. Even after the feeding miracle, it hadn't fully sunk in. Their hearts were still somehow hardened. It shows how easily we can see miracles but fail to truly grasp their implication, fail to let them soften our hearts and deepen our trust. We can forget so quickly.
Wow. So the chapter ends when they finally land at Janosar. People immediately recognize Jesus. Word spreads like wildfire. They start bringing sick people from all over the region, laying them on mats, just begging to touch even the fringe that did sit on his robe, and all who touched it were healed. Just this wave of healing driven by simple, desperate faith.
It's a powerful image to end on. Those people, they acted in faith with the understanding they had. They believed in physical healing, and they reached out. And for us, the parallel is profound. All who come to Jesus reaching out in faith will be healed spiritually, saved for eternity. And, this whole sequence, the storm, the healings, it must have stretched the disciples' faith too. It reminds us that putting our faith into action, even when we feel weak or unsure, that's how we grow. Jesus asks us to step out.
What a journey through Mark chapter 6. We've touched on so much. The challenge of familiarity and faith and relationships, the wisdom of knowing when to move on in ministry, Jesus empowering others, his incredible compassion, that stunning provision, and the struggle to recognize him even after miracles. It's dense with lessons.
It really is. And it leaves us with a key question, perhaps, for you listening. How do these stories challenge or maybe deepen your own idea of faith or provision? Seeing God show up even when the disciples are struggling or their hearts are a bit hard, how might that change how you view your own difficulties, knowing he's there, wanting to come alongside you if you let him? Something to think about.
Absolutely. We definitely encourage you to dig into the source material yourself. Continue your own deep dive. There's always more richness to uncover in these texts.